All right, so some of my regular clients that I sometimes do readings for are starting to ask different kinds of questions. Rather than questions about like what's going to happen to me, they're asking about these higher principles. And in this video, we're going to talk about what is love? Not necessarily personal love between two people, but the higher sort of spiritual kind of love. What does this really mean, and how do you get to that? This is kind of a multi layered question. So we'll have to talk about a few things and get to that in a second. So this is the astrological glyph of the sun. And you could say that the dot in the middle represents your conscious mind, the point of view, your perspective, and the circle around it is the subconscious mind, which happens to also be the experience of an external world. There really is no difference. The things you experience in the external world are projections of your own consciousness. So the circle around the dot is like the screen that you project your consciousness onto and experience as an external world. And the things that manifest are the product of your own state of consciousness, right? And so the feeling of love is really comes up when the illusion of separation between these two aspects of consciousness disappears. You realize that there is no difference between the inner and outer worlds, and that you are not your thoughts. This sense of a solid, consistent self is an illusion. It's the ego. It's a collection of thoughts, beliefs, emotions. And when the illusion disappears, the two aspects of consciousness merge together as one. You realize you are the space which contains all things. And in tarot, here we have the Two of Cups. For you tarot experts, I know this isn't in line with the traditional correspondences, but I thought it looked cool. And so the males in the tarot often represent the active principle of consciousness, the conscious mind, the things that stick out from the background of reality. And the females tend to represent the subconscious, the background of reality from which all things rise out of. And when these two things come together, you see they kind of form this caduceus, the symbol of enlightenment, a higher state of consciousness, a heightened love, the metaphysical kind of love. Often when people see this card in the tarot, they interpret it on the most surface level way of, oh, I'm going to meet a new person. And it can mean that in some cases, but ultimately that's what this is symbolizing, is this higher sense of love. But then we have the ego, which is the obstacle to this kind of love. And it is a collection of unconscious wounds, things that you were taught or things that happened to you that created beliefs early in life, usually from birth until about age 7. You kind of absorb everything from your parents, from the culture around you, from the people at school. You just absorb all these things and experience. And if you have a particularly difficult childhood and you have a lot of trauma, then you got some more stuff to sort through. But ultimately, this ego is the manifestation of all of these different unconscious fears and wounds and feelings coming together to form this sense of identity, the voice that calls itself I. And in order to kind of dissolve this, you have to face those wounds and those emotions. And there are different ways of doing this, one of which, the way that I subscribe to, is through ceremonial high magic, the Golden Dawn system. Really what this is, it's not a people often approach the idea of magic like this quest for power where they're looking for a spell that will be a quick fix to all their problems, but that's really not how it works. It's really more of a process of manifesting your karma, calling up these unconscious wounds. Karma is basically the process of these inner states of consciousness manifesting as external circumstances so that you can face them and deal with them and process the emotions that these things trigger. And one of the methods of dealing with that is really just giving your attention to those triggers. When things happen in your daily life, you have to pay attention to when you get triggered, you have to pay attention to where that emotion is coming from in your body. It'll feel most strong in a specific place in the body. And if you give your attention to that place in the body, that little ball of frozen energy, it will slowly start to dissipate and kind of melt like a block of ice. Let's see here. And this ego really has two main drives. It is driven towards survival, the perpetuation of this familiar sense of self, as well as the perpetuation of your physical body. But it kind of always chases after survival and love at the same time. All of our ambitions and drives and goals, The real thing that anyone is after is the feeling that they think they're going to get when they achieve specific sets of circumstances. The ego has this set of prerequisites that it feels it needs to fulfill before it's allowed to turn off, to relax, to feel safe, to feel worthy of love. And it thinks that if it achieves this specific set of circumstances, it can finally relax and turn off and feel love. But it can't do that because turning off and feeling love is in direct violation of its other prerogative, which is survival. If it feels like it's safe to turn off and disappear, the ego interprets that as death. And because its drive is to survive, it can't do that. So it's kind of this cursed entity that just endlessly is doomed to chase after something it is fundamentally incapable of achieving, and creates this cycle of suffering. The wheel of samsara, this constant remanifestation of these internal states of consciousness as external circumstances that just continue to come back over and over again in different forms. Even if the circumstance is different, the emotional quality of those manifestations tends to stay the same until you do the work of calling those things up, giving them your attention, and letting them sort of dissolve. And when you do this process of giving your attention to these little frozen blocks of emotion in your nervous system, it's important to kind of view it with the kind of sort of compassion. Like I meant to pull up the Six of Cups here because that's a really good card for this. In Buddhism, there's a type of meditation. It's called metta meditation. It basically translates to loving kindness meditation, where you conjure up these images of things that are easy for you to feel like affection and adoration for. Ajahn Brahm, one of these monks that I used to watch a lot, he would always use the image of like finding a little baby kitten in the gutter, and you pick it up and you take care of it and clean it, and just anything that you feel is easy to evoke that sense of affection, compassion, loving kindness, whether it's a cute baby or someone you love or a puppy or a kitten. It doesn't matter. Anything that you kind of look at with like sort of like sweet innocence, you can conjure up that quality of attention. And it's important to use that when you are trying to dissolve these unconscious patterns and these frozen balls of energy. Because it will kind of fight back. If you approach it like, I want to get rid of you, why aren't you going away? And you just like kind of take this like, you want to destroy it, it tends to fight back a lot harder. And I wish I had learned this earlier on, because the ego it really fights back when you start doing this work. And I'll make another video on that later. But it's not quite as bad if you do it from a position of you're just giving it your loving, affectionate attention. You're not trying to get rid of it, but the result of that is that you do end up sort of getting rid of these wounds, these blocks, but you're not getting rid of the ego or your ability to create conscious thought. Obviously, it's more like you're taming it. The ego is kind of like an unruly dragon, where you have to tame it or else it just torments you and just causes you all kinds of problems. There's a show, The House of the Dragons, kind of a Game of Thrones spinoff, and there's a scene that I'm reminded of where they need to gather up more people they need more dragon riders. They have all these dragons that nobody is riding, so they need to bring people in to see if they can tame the dragon. And she says, it's a dangerous process. If you want to claim a dragon, you have to be willing to die. And that kind of reminded me of this sort of process, because the ego, when it dissolves, it views that as death. And there has to be this willingness to face the fear and accept this feeling of the fear that you're just going to wink out of existence and disappear entirely. You don't, obviously, of course, but it feels like it. And there has to be this willingness to accept that you will die one day. Not necessarily like right now, but the acceptance of the fact of death, like the willingness to accept that kind of allows for this, the unruly dragon, this untamed ego, to be calm and become a servant of you, rather than something that is constantly fighting you and driving you and tormenting you and causing unnecessary suffering. Anyways, it's kind of an aside. Now we can approach this from another angle as well and ask, what is desire really? And I picked this up from Liam Christopher. He's the guy who wrote the Kabbalah Magic book that I'm always talking about, that has the initiation process in it. And there's essentially two dimensions of desire, the two vibrations of Venus. We have the the horizontal dimension of desire, which is all about things, material desires, and one object desiring another object, one person desiring another person or another object. And this is kind of that results in that endless cycle of the ego chasing after a perfect set of circumstances that gives it permission to finally let go. So it's a never-ending cycle. But this is kind of where most people are at. But then we have the vertical dimension of desire, which is the desire for the state of consciousness itself, not for the stuff. And one of the interesting things that happens is that when you pursue things in this way, you are after the state of consciousness for its own sake, love for love's sake. The universe tends to kind of bring you the things you need in order to continue that process. And it doesn't always give you what you want. Sometimes what you need is to be put in a situation where you got to face your fears. That is part of the process. These unconscious wounds, when they manifest directly, you have to literally face your fear. Not in the sense that like you have to put yourself in a dangerous situation and just do it anyways. You face the fear internally, the fear that the external circumstance brings up. You have to face internally and give it your awareness. Don't try to get rid of it. Don't try to push it away. Just give it that sort of that loving kindness kind of attention that we talked about earlier. So people often get hung up on the idea of like letting go of the material pursuits. Well, does that mean I have to deny myself of all the pleasures in life? No, absolutely not. It's just no longer a need. You no longer need to chase after them. They're no longer a set of requirements for you to feel the thing that we're all ultimately trying to feel anyways. And if you're a kind of person who gets into the practice of ceremonial high magic, this pursuit of these states of consciousness is really what it's all about. You learn to embody these different archetypal forces, and you start to take on the qualities of these higher principles, and those principles, they start to kind of radiate out of you. You start to take on just a authentic quality that you don't have to really try to put out there. It just changes the way that you present yourself and the way that your experience of who you are, and that kind of radiates out into the world around you. And then you start to manifest the things that are in alignment with that state of consciousness. People start to kind of change and take on those qualities around you. Sometimes people start to they are sometimes elevated to these heightened places of society where they serve as like these role models in a way. Like you see this more often in like TV shows and actors, the paragon, the heroes, the people that like have these really these heightened sort of qualities, these moral virtues, and they kind of are the hero. Anyways, what am I trying to say here? I guess my point is that the circumstances, the external praise, the things that come to you, these are all secondary byproducts of that pursuit of these states of consciousness. And so you don't really have to worry about any of those. They'll let them take care of themselves. And when you do this, when you approach desire from the sort of vertical dimension, you're in alignment with what the higher self wants. Your will becomes aligned with what the higher self wants, and then it can feel like you're dancing with the universe. The Four of Wands is a good depiction of this, where you have the male figure, the conscious mind, dancing with the female figure, the subconscious mind, the universe. And it's like everything feels just perfectly synchronized. It's like the universe is just carrying you forward. You have the wind at your back. It's an amazing experience when it happens. And so it really comes down to the individual to decide, like, what are you really trying to do with your spiritual practice? Are you just wanting to feel a little better so you can be better at your job, or just kind of remove some anxiety and fear and unpleasant emotions? Or are you in the pursuit of actual enlightenment? And that word enlightenment, I feel like it's overly dramatic. It's kind of blown out of proportion, because what we're really describing here, this state of love, this realization of the illusory nature of the separation between the external world and internal world, this is the natural state. We were designed for this. But for some reason, in the distant past, something must have happened where this collective ego formed. And then we've chased it for thousands of years now and created a whole society on top of it. And Now we've gotten so far away from this natural state of consciousness that we have to create all these big dramatic myths all around it and turn it into this uh, big drama, this big deal. Even though it is actually the natural state, we have to go through this whole, like, the hero's journey, in order to get to that, to get back to where we kind of started in the first place. So enlightenment isn't just for the monks living in caves in the Himalayan mountains or whatever. It's not, you don't have to be special or in a special place to be able to do this. This is available to everyone. But to really get there, you have to be willing to go through the unpleasant experience of initiation, so to speak, whether you do that through ritual magic or just through um, meditation. If you do it through meditation, you're in for a much longer journey. Even Buddhists tell you that this is a multiple lifetime endeavor. But if you go through the initiation through high magic, that supposedly is a way to complete the great work in one lifetime. And accelerated evolution means accelerated suffering, because all that stuff that's hiding in your subconscious, and believe me, there's more in there than you might think. You got to face it, all of it. Um, and it's not a pleasant process. You're literally looking at giving attention to the pain that you have spent your whole life avoiding looking at. And so this is not for, this process is not for dabblers who are in the pursuit of power, who think they're going to find a quick fix spell to change their life. That's kind of a baited hook. You kind of get drawn into magic and the occult with this promise of power and control, until eventually you start to realize, well, you should realize that it's not about that at all. This is something else entirely. This is a path to enlightenment, and it's all about emotional healing. So anyways, I think maybe I will stop there. So hopefully this has been interesting or helpful to you. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll talk to you again soon. Take care.